welcome. If you're not sure where you are today, you are joining AFSC as we engage our readers, our constituents, our partners and friends and allies in our Citizenship for All campaign. This week, we have a series of events where we'll be educating folks on why we're calling for citizenship for all, how we are calling for citizenship for all, and to whom we are directing those calls. And so we invite you to join us in multiple spaces, and wanted to put up a quick reminder um, of um, of the spaces that we will be engaging in. So I am Penel Ibe, and I am the Policy Engagement Coordinator with AFSC's Public Policy Office in DC, a mouthful. And I work with so many great individuals across the country in advancing our policy goals and making sure that our community's demands are relayed as authentically as possible to the elected officials who make decisions here in DC. One of these demands has been centered around defending immigrant rights in the communities that we support far and wide. And today, we work on a particular demand that is near and dear to our hearts: citizenship for all 11 million undocumented individuals in the United States. On our call today, you will be hearing from directly impacted leaders who have been working with their community to resist the efforts to separate the community, to harm the community, um, and working with their community to defend their immigrant rights. You will also hear from AFSC staff and advocates who work alongside directly impacted leaders to make sure that their needs are met, they're supported in their call, and that we're amplifying the call for protections where needed. Before we get started, I would remind you that we have a virtual phone bank tomorrow that we will be doing in partnership with our Asian American Pacific Islander organizations under NACASEC and faith partners in the Interfaith Immigration Coalition. In this space, we will make in real time calls to members of Congress, uplifting our demands for citizenship for all and to end inhumane practices to detention and deportation. All you have to do is show up with the phone and make sure that you have a strong internet connection, and we will lead you with a quick training. We will let you know what is happening, what you need to say, and you will be in community as you make calls and speak truth to power, calling your elected officials to support immigrant communities and to stay true to the demands that we've been uplifting. So please visit bit.ly/citizenship for all calls, as you can see on the screen here, to register. And thanks, Piper, for putting that in the chat. And once you register, we invite you to join us at 5 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow to engage in these conversations. I will then also sort of pass it on to Itzel. Itzel is our organizer and directly impacted leader with AFSC's Red Bank office in New Jersey. Itzel is also a DACA recipient and has been working alongside her community to advocate for their rights, both in the states and at the federal level. Itzel today is going to share with us what is our grounding moment, what is the state of play in our community, and why are we called to action in this moment. Itzel?
Thank you, Peniel, and thank you everyone for being on this webinar today. I think that as we go forward having this conversation tonight, it is really important for us to keep in mind what the situation is and has been for 11 million immigrants in the United States. Um, Throughout this whole pandemic, which is going on to its first full year, but even previous to that, um, immigrant and undocumented immigrants have been excluded, especially during this pandemic, from any type of financial relief that they should be receiving, both from the states and the government. And I really think that, as cruel as that sounds, it is a microcosm of the cruelty of the immigration system overall. I also want to remind folks that though I myself am personally excited that there's a new administration in place, that deportations and detentions continue. And so, as we start hearing about the different pieces of legislation and folks that are impacted, it is really important for us to center ourselves and remember why this work is so crucial and why the time is now. I like to think of immigration and our chance for us to reform the system right now, not as just a time for us to be able to put any one piece of legislation forth that provides a pathway to citizenship for 11 million undocumented immigrants. But it also feels to me like the right time for us to start reconsidering and reframing how we talk about immigration going forward. Um, what we are calling for today is, of course, the pathway to citizenship for all members of our communities, but also an undoing of harmful, racist, and oppressive policies for the immigrants that are going to come next. Immigration is inevitable and it's never going to stop. And so, as we continue to have these conversations, I really urge people to think and feel and really center themselves around the fact that the time for change is now. Um, it we are way past due having to put something forth that is humane, that is compassionate, and that values and upholds the dignity and respects every single human being in this country.
Thank you so much, Itzel, for letting us know why the moment is now, what our communities are facing. Across the United States, there are more than 11 million undocumented people who are vital members of our community. They support families financially and emotionally. They support loved ones. They are part of civic organizations. They are part of business organizations as well. And they do so much to make sure that their community is stable, their community is well loved, and the well being of their community is centered. Yet they struggle every day because they do not have an opportunity to sort of be on a pathway to citizenship. They are American and part of our community in many ways, but because of documentation, they are not able to access certain benefits like Itzel had flagged. More than that, they're also subjected to the cruel and unjust detention and deportation policies that our administration and Congress people have put forward in these communities. Many people live in fear every day that they could one day be separated from their families, their loved ones, their communities that they call home, lose their home, their jobs, and the decades of lives that they've built in the United States. There's urgency for us to stop inflicting such fear on our communities. There's urgency for us to call on our elected officials to do better, to recognize the humanity, recognize the lives and the contributions the 11 million undocumented people bring to the lives around them, to the people around them, and put them on a pathway to citizenship so that they are stable and do not continue to live in limbo and in fear of detention and deportation. Now we're going to hear from some of our directly impacted leaders who are on our call today. We will be hearing first from Erica Vargas. Erica was born in Morelos, Mexico, and immigrated to the United States in 2003 at the age of 18. She met her husband, Fernando, in Madison, Wisconsin. They moved to Denver 5 years ago, following Fernando's work. They have 3 children together. Everything she does is for her children, and she enjoys dancing with them and going to the park. She is active in her church, the Valverde Presbyterian, and Erica has become active in the immigrant rights movement because her husband was thrown into detention and deportation proceedings. She's now part of the leadership team of the Not One More table in Denver, Colorado. Then we will hear from Leroy Montel. Leroy Montel is a temporary protected status holder from Haiti who has lived in the United States since 2001, specifically in New Jersey. Leroy, in this time, has raised 2 U.S. citizen children and works as a truck driver. He has been working through this pandemic to support his family and community and continues to advocate for TPS holders like himself and other undocumented immigrants who will benefit from a pathway to citizenship. And lastly, we will hear from Rosalba Hernandez, another community leader with AFSC's US Mexico border program. Rosalba, a community leader, continues to work with her community to advance their rights, to fight against the attacks of immigration enforcement, detention and deportation, and also make sure to uplift the issues that the border community is facing because of the unjust policies that our administration previously and other administrations have put forward. I will stop sharing my screen now so we can first hear from Erica, then we'll hear from Leroy, and then we'll hear from Rosalba.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos de Denver. Soy Erika. Como ya lo habían mencionado, soy madre de 3 niños nacidos acá y crucé frontera en el 2003. Crucé frontera porque vengo de una familia de violencia familiar. Mi padre es alcohólico y tuve que tomar la decisión a los 18 años de cruzar frontera, a pesar de que la frontera podría ser la muerte. Tomé esa decisión porque yo tenía que hacerme cargo de mi familia, de mi madre y de mis hermanos. Llegar a Estados Unidos fue un verdadero reto porque no tengo absolutamente nadie aquí y las cosas se pusieron muy difíciles. Entré en una fuerte depresión, pero salí de ella porque vino mi hija a salvarme la vida. Pero las cosas no han sido nada fácil acá. Ha sido muy difícil porque nos han discriminado, hemos sido marginados, señalados por tan solo el hecho de tener la piel, yo le digo piel chocolatita, piel morenita, y por eso nos discrimina. Y yo creo que es muy importante que vean del por qué cruzamos, del por qué venimos para acá. No venimos a robarles nada, solamente venimos a que nos den una oportunidad de tener una mejor vida, de salir adelante, de que nuestros hijos sean mejores personas. Pero yo creo que el camino a la ciudadanía debería de ser muy importante para ya no seguir viviendo con miedo, con temor, poder dormir en paz y sin tener ese miedo de que me puedan separar de mis hijos. Mi esposo en el 2013, perdón, fue, uh, fue detenido por ICE. Lo detuvieron cuando yo tenía a mi bebé pequeñita. Entonces yo sentí que el mundo encima se me vino. No encontraba la manera de cómo iba a pagar renta, cómo iba a pagar luz. Gracias que una iglesia me acogió y tuve bastante ayuda, pero las cosas fueron muy difíciles. Mi esposo estuvo 8 meses detenido en migración y las cosas no fueron nada fácil para una mujer sola con sus 3 hijos. Mi hija hasta el día de hoy vive con el trauma de que nos puedan separar, con el trauma y el miedo de que si algún día nos separan, ella no sabe qué es lo que va a hacer. Ella ya es una joven, es una adolescente y ya sabe más o menos uh, el problema que estamos lidiando, el problema que se está viviendo ahora con nosotros que estamos de inmigrantes acá, que no son las cosas como ellos creen. No venimos a robar, no venimos a quitarles nada. Al contrario, venimos a que nos den una oportunidad para salir adelante, una oportunidad de que nuestros hijos sean alguien en la vida. Por eso yo creo que es muy importante también que todos seamos elegidos sin exclusiones para una ciudadanía, porque aquí todos aportamos. Hay muchos que están trabajando restaurantes, limpiando casas, mi esposo que trabaja en construcción. Cualquier ayuda, cualquier trabajo que es un aporte para el país, y yo creo que tenemos derecho a un salario mejor, tenemos derecho a un seguro social, tenemos derecho a tener libertad, pero sobre todo respetando las leyes de este país. Tenemos derecho, nuestros hijos tienen derecho a que crezcan aquí junto a sus padres, pero también tienen derecho de conocer nuestras raíces, de dónde venimos, de dónde somos, porque desafortunadamente mis hijos no conocen a mi familia por el hecho de que yo no puedo llevarlos. Mis hijos me preguntan, mamá, quisiera conocer a mis abuelos, quisiera conocer de dónde vienes, tus raíces. No los puedo llevar porque desafortunadamente no lo puedo hacer por mis estatus. Por eso es tan importante que haya una ciudadanía para los 11 millones de personas que estamos aquí y que aportamos a este país. Y al aportar, la economía subiría más. No nada más estamos hablando de que queremos un salario igual, sino que también la economía va a subir y va a mejorar el país. Todo es para mejor. Entonces, yo me gustaría que sí hubiera eso y que saliéramos de las sombras, que saliéramos de ese miedo, que ya tuviéramos un poco de libertad para poder salir, para no tener el miedo de a veces de que no queremos ni ir a un hospital, por no tener un seguro médico. A veces el miedo nos hace que a veces nos quedemos en la casa enfermos, porque sabemos que va a llegar el bill caro, porque sabemos que no tenemos seguro médico y es mejor que nos automediquemos nosotros mismos. Entonces, yo creo que somos humanos todos y todos tenemos el mismo derecho. Todos valemos lo mismo y no es justo que algunos sí puedan tener documentos o algunos sí puedan estar bien en este país, cuando creo que este es el país de todos y todos deberíamos de ser iguales, todos somos humanos y todos valemos lo mismo, pero con el hecho de que algunos tienen, algunos no, empieza la marginación y empieza la discriminación. Y pues ante todo, muchas gracias por escucharme y por su tiempo.
Thank you so much, Erica, for sharing your story. It is much appreciated. We appreciate your tenacity and your willingness to not just to use your experience to help others with your leadership on the Not One More table, and to continue to advocate for what you know is right, and like you said, for the human rights that we all have. Next, we'll hear from Leroy. Leroy.
Hello, my name is Leroy Montel. I come from Haiti, been in this country since 2001, and I spent my whole prime age, my whole prime time in this country. I'm having two kids in this country and been working hard since, and to provide my kids a better life and to provide a better life to myself also. I'm driving truck since, but I never, I, I'm always at the front line. Doesn't matter if there is storm, if there is um, snow or whatever time of storm it is. In addition, I'm always there to do something, to help, to fighting, to make things better. But I'm here today to say that I cannot afford to see one day I will grab my two kids to go back home, to go back to Haiti, because since I've been here since 2001, I was at a very young age. Back home, those my friends, those that I know, they're not home anymore, and I don't know where they is. I don't see myself one day to see that I will go back home with my kids. My kids, I don't see that. I will not appreciate that to see that they separate from their school, they separate from their friend. I don't. I will not appreciate to see that they will grow up just like I did and move from my country, come here, and to see that today my kids will move from their country to go back to Haiti, where we have a lot of problem back to Haiti, where kidnapping is the number one I can say is a day-to-day situation. So many diseases after the earthquake, the country the country is not moving forward. The country is backward. Um, I wish that the government choose to do something for our situation and see how they can provide us a green card and make sure that we have access to apply for a citizenship. We can stay here and spend our life with our kids, the kids that born in here, the American citizen kids that born in here. I wish they understand that. I wish they know that they cannot deport those kids, because when you deported the parents, you deported the kids, and that this is something that can mess up our kids' education. But I wish that they do something better. Um, I just want to make sure everyone understand that the situation to have two citizen American kids, to see that one day those kids will move from this country where they born to go to Haiti. I think that will be hard. I hope the government do something about it to make sure that we have chance to stay with our kids in this country and make sure that we provide our kids a very good education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leroy. Much appreciated. And thank you for sharing your story as well. We invite you to also, Leroy's story is recorded and available on AFSC's website. If you just search Leroy Montel. And that way you can also hear him speak a little bit more about his experience and his fight for permanent residency and a path to citizenship in the United States. Next, we'll hear from Rosalba Hernandez, who is a leader with the AFSC US-Mexico Border Program. Rosalba?
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Rosalba Hernández. Yo estoy participando desde San Diego, California, bajo la organización de AFSC, también de aquí. Desde que desafortunadamente fui víctima de una redada de ICE en mi sitio de trabajo, que era un mercado oriental, que aún está esa marqueta. Lamentablemente fui víctima de esa redada. Fuimos 26 trabajadores que fuimos afectados en nuestra área de trabajo, nos detuvieron. Y pues lamentablemente de esa fecha acá hemos vivido bajo mucha presión. Comentaba yo que ya tengo aquí viviendo 19 años. Soy madre de 5 hijos. Soy casada. En este momento no estoy trabajando puesto que tuve un bebé, pero anteriormente nos las hemos pasado fatal porque a partir de la redada pues ya fue más difícil poder conseguir trabajo, puesto que esto se hizo público y cada que vamos a algún lado a pedir trabajo, pues resalta el que, oh, tú fuiste detenida ahí, lamentablemente no te podemos contratar. De por sí es difícil conseguir un trabajo, puesto que no tenemos un estatus regular, pues ahora en mi persona se me ha hecho más difícil. Comentaba yo que bajo la...
Rosalba, ¿podemos tomar una pausa
Sí.
para poder traducir? I'm sorry, is it okay if we take a pause so I can interpret up what Ms. Rosalba said right now and then she can continue? I apologize for interrupting. Is that okay?
Yes,
Yes,
that's
go ahead.
perfect.
Okay, so she says, hello, my name is Rosalba, and I'm from San Diego, and she's also involved with AFC. She says that during, she was a victim during an ICE roundup that happened, and she says it was in an Asian supermarket, and she says she was detained along with 26 other workers, and she says, she's been here in the U.S. for 19 years. She's a mom. She's got 5 kids. And she says that, she's not working right now because she had a child recently, but she says that, ever since the roundup happened, that she's been having a difficulty finding work. If it was difficult before, finding work, that it's been even more difficult now because it was made public. People know, oh, you were part of that. So redada or roundup, so she says it's almost nearly impossible to be able to find work. And that's when I interrupted her. ¿Puede continuar, señora Rosalba?
Sí, gracias. Entonces, como lo comentaba, nosotros somos una comunidad inmigrante que venimos aquí para tener un futuro mejor para nuestras familias en México y para los que tenemos aquí familia para nuestros hijos, ¿verdad? Entonces, como lo comentaba, desafortunadamente años atrás tuvimos una administración nefasta que solamente iba en contra de toda la comunidad trabajadora. Ahora con esta nueva administración, esperemos que haya un cambio significativo para nosotros, puesto que somos unos trabajadores que aquí somos esenciales. Desafortunadamente, con esto que ha pasado de la pandemia, hemos sido todavía más afectados que como vivíamos antes. Lamentablemente, ahorita el decir, tengo 2 trabajos y eso es con lo que yo puedo sacar a mi familia adelante, ahora es todavía más difícil porque lamentablemente el trabajo es menos. Ahora si hay trabajo, solamente quieren verificar que tenga uno un seguro bueno y no lo tenemos. Entonces, pues
Priscilla.
Yes, I'm sorry. I believe did Miss Rosalba freeze or okay? I can interpret what she said up into this point. Is that okay? So Ms. Rosalba was saying that, that she's come here, o la señora Rosalba se congeló en la pantalla, entonces voy a traducir, interpretar lo que usted dijo hasta este punto y puede seguir después, okay? So Ms. Rosalba was saying how whenever she came to this country, and also, she not only is here to, to help her family get ahead, but also her family that's in Mexico as well. She says, unfortunately, in the last administration, that there was a lot of a lot against the community, and she's hoping with this new administration that there is a big change. She goes, because we are essential workers, and during the pandemic we've been even more more affected, and to be able to find work has been even more difficult. There's less work, and of course, she says they ask you, for a valid social security number, and now with the pandemic that it's been even more difficult to find work without a social security number, and that's when she froze. La señora Rosalba, ¿quiere continuar, por favor?
Y como lo comentaba, el tema ahorita es camino a la ciudadanía, ¿verdad? Y nosotros merecemos y queremos que fuese un poco más corto y no esperar tanto tiempo, puesto que yo siento que vamos a vivir todavía más bajo presión. El estar pensando que, no voy a poder hacer esto porque me va a afectar. Hay cosas que a veces ni siquiera sabemos que nos puede afectar a nosotros bajo un trámite migratorio. Es importante acercarse a organizaciones para que nos orienten y nos digan cómo podemos estar a partir de que si se llegase a dar una reforma para nosotros, qué pasos seguir para no regarla y que no nos vayan a quitar ese derecho de seguir y esperar hasta que se pueda hacer una ciudadanía. Se agradece que en esta administración nos tomen en cuenta y nos valoren como lo que somos, como los trabajadores esenciales que a este país aportamos más que los mismos ciudadanos que están aquí. Ustedes se han dado cuenta y mucha gente se ha dado cuenta que durante esta pandemia los que hemos tratado de sacar adelante a este país hemos sido nosotros, la comunidad trabajadora, la comunidad inmigrante que tiene la necesidad y tiene que salir a buscar un trabajo. Entonces, el que nos quieran a nosotros también incluir bajo esta administración un rumbo a la ciudadanía, para nosotros sería fantástico que no lo hicieran tan largo y nos dieran la oportunidad de no vivir ya bajo la sombra y no vivir con más presión todavía y agradecer el que en este momento de pandemia que se necesita todavía más contribución de nosotros, nos dieran ese derecho que merecemos.
Okay, she says that during this road to citizenship, it's something that we deserve. And also for them to make the time period shorter, to not make us wait so long, for it not to be so much pressure. She goes, because yes, and also to know, what we're able to do, that it won't affect our status, to be able to be guided, to receive some type of guidance or counseling after even if there is immigration reform, like what steps do we need to take so they won't take away our rights. It's also I'm also thankful, for this administration to take into account and also to value us, to be able to value us as citizens, and especially during this pandemic. It's been the immigrant community that has been out working, that has been out to look for work because out of necessity. This road to citizenship is very important to us, so we won't have to live in the shadows, and we won't have to live under pressure anymore. And also for us to be taken into account, we're the ones that have been also working in our communities during the pandemic, and that should be taken into consideration as well.
Thank you so much, Rosalba, for sharing your story. We're going to go ahead and move on now to Piper, who will be sharing with us the principles that ground us in our advocacy for immigrant rights and towards humane immigration policy. We've heard from multiple speakers today about it's about humanity and the rights that we as humans have and deserve and continue to fight for. And so Piper will share with us what are those principles that help us make sure that we are centering human rights in our immigration policy advocacy.
Thank you. Thank you all again for joining us tonight and all of your patience and grace, both in English and in Spanish, in making this a space where all of us can speak the language of our hearts. This path, the new path, is actually a document that AFSC created almost over a decade ago with directly impacted people from all over the country, leaders who gathered together to really examine the immigration reform that was then being promoted in both parties to evaluate what is the lived experience and reality of immigrant communities, and what would an overhaul of our system, a complete retooling, really look like. Something that would recognize the dignity, the investment, the trust, and the humanity of folks who are our neighbors, like Rosalba, like Leroy, like Erica and their families, who are part of the fabric of our communities all over the country. So we wanted to talk about each of our principles briefly, and really because we can't talk about citizenship in a vacuum. Like that alone will resolve all the problems that all the oppression that comes from our current immigration system. So we really believe that humane and just immigration policies must be grounded in the analysis and the solutions that the immigrant community themselves bring forward. And our work as staff is to really bring that into the light, and all of your help, we can really amplify these principles with our congressional leaders. So we want to develop humane economic and environmental policies that reduce or prevent forced migration. Lots of our now neighbors would have loved to have stayed in their countries of origin, and the United States has a really key role in promoting policies that do push immigration, migration from other countries. Secondly, we really want to protect the labor rights of all workers. I grew up in a union family. That's part of the reason why I'm able to be here as an organizer now. We know that when we get each other's backs as workers, and when we all have a living and an enjoyable, thriving wage, whether that's in the United States or countries of origin, that all of us are better served by that. We want to make sure we have a quick path, a transparent path to permanent residency and citizenship for people who are living here now and folks who may want to come in the future. And we're going to talk mostly about that today and what you can do to make that a reality. We want to respect the civil and human rights of all people, including immigrants within the United States. And I think you heard a lot from all three of our speakers about the discrimination and challenges that people face, both under the law and interpersonally while they're in the US. We want to make sure that any policy addresses that and really strengthens protections for all of us. We want to make sure that we're demilitarizing the US-Mexico border and those border communities who have been so deeply impacted since 1994 and continue to see more and more investment in the militarization and the oppression of their communities, the erosion of their rights. And it's really important that those of us in the interior learn about that and push for policies that really help revitalize those communities and pull the military and the Border Patrol out. We want to make sure that family and loved ones reunification is a priority. Many of our members here in Denver have seen their family members deported over the last 10 years, and looking for a path to return is one of their main priorities, to reunify their families and bring their loved ones home. And we want to ensure that all people living in the United States, including immigrants, have access to public services and to supports that help them thrive in our communities and be able to bring all of their talent and culture and family into the fabric of our lives. And in order to do that, we really need to make sure we have policies that include people and not exclude them. So that's the overall arching principles and values that ground the work that we do as AFSC, both as a Quaker-inspired organization and as an organization that's committed to following the leadership of our immigrant leaders. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Peniel and Tori to talk more about what that means in this moment and what that means when we dig deeper into a path to citizenship for all, and what you can do to answer that call. Thanks, Peniel.
Thank you so much, Piper. And so Piper, as Piper shared, there are grounding principles that help us navigate the murky policy world. Very often, we get lost in what is politically viable, what can move, what cannot move, what is Congress ready to do, what is Congress not willing to do. And every time we look at these principles, it helps us inform what we put towards Congress. And to say that if you are putting forward legislation that is supposed to provide citizenship for all, and legislation that is supposed to protect immigrant communities, especially when we talk about a clear path to citizenship for all people, these are the three things that ground us. You have to create legislation that creates a clear, inclusive, transparent, and timely roadmap to permanent residency and citizenship for all 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States, no exceptions. And what clear means is that people, individuals, advocates, allies see that this is clearly a legislation that is a roadmap to citizenship for all. We know what it is. It is not hidden. It is not unclear. It is accessible, like a pathway to citizenship, a roadmap to citizenship. It is transparent. And so that means when it's implemented, individuals know what is required of them to access this relief. Inclusive. We want relief for all our community members, not some, not just folks who have DACA or Dreamers, that's what they're called in the media, or TPS holders or asylum seekers. We mean anyone who is in need of a permanent protections, which includes a pathway to residency and ultimately citizenship. Anyone who's vulnerable to detention and deportation, and these permanent protections will protect them. We want you to protect them. It does not matter what happened in their past, how they got into the United States. If they're vulnerable and need this protection, they deserve that protection. We're also saying timely. Very often we see legislation where members of Congress put individuals on a precarious pathway to citizenship that is 5 years plus. And so in those 5 years, individuals unfortunately have more ways of falling off this protection through minor infractions here and there or minor technicalities than more ways of staying on. And so after biding time and waiting these 5 to 10 years, still individuals are not able to apply for citizenship at the end because the policy was precarious. It had too many loops and hoops to jump through, and individuals continue to remain in limbo even though they had a protection. We do not want protections like that for our community. We want stability, and being undocumented has already put enough of fear and of instability in our community's life. When you're bringing relief, it should remedy that. It should bring stability. It should bring clarity. It should be definite protections. And we say without exception, and we want to continue to elevate that call, because we're seeing that every time we see legislation, our members of Congress across both sides of the aisle, Democratic, Republican members of Congress, try to find communities that they can exclude. And we do not exclude people from human rights. We do not exclude people from protection. That is not what our faith is calling us to do. That's not what our morals are calling us to do. And we need to make sure that our members of Congress know this as well. We're also saying that legislation must prioritize reunification for loved ones and families. And what does that mean? That means listening to individuals who have been separated from their loved ones and what their demands are and what reunification would look like for them. And for a number of people, it involves eliminating the decades-long backlogs in family visa applications. Individuals have applied years ago to be reunited with their family members and their loved ones, and the documentation is still processing. And in these years that they're waiting, lives continue, birthdays are missed, key moments in their lives are missed that they would have loved to have their family member or their loved one be present for. Addressing this backlog is key. There are policies in our immigration law that bar people from reunited with their family members if they were deported. For some people, it's 5 years. For some people, it's 3 years. For some people, it's 20 years. And for some people, it's for life. Once you are deported based on some issue that you had with immigration enforcement, you're not allowed to return to the United States. This is an issue because this prevents families from reunifying, and our community members, especially individuals that are impacted by this inhumane rule, are calling on members of Congress to rectify this and to remove these bars so that they can reunite with their families. And for people who are not members of families in the United States, people who fled some issue, people who are looking for a better economic chance here, academic chance here, whatever it is, to give them a pathway to return to a community that they were once part of, to a community that they hope to be a part of. And lastly, in all of this, we need legislation that respects human, civil, and labor rights of all immigrants. That means do not pass legislation that offers a pathway to citizenship while passing provisions that detains and deports people. Do not pass legislation that offers a pathway to citizenship while excluding these individuals from access to full services and benefits. Do not pass this while giving them second-class rights in their places of work. We do not want to see a second-class tier of citizenship being created for 11 million undocumented immigrants. They deserve to be treated the same as everyone else. They deserve their human rights, their labor rights, their civil rights to be centered like everyone else. And so when we advocate for legislation, we continue to call on that every day in every space that we're in, because very, very so often the media forgets that these are lives of human beings in our community and talk about some bogus numbers and what's happening on the Hill and what's happening within Congress, forgetting that at a day-to-day level, individuals are impacted by the inaction from Congress. Individuals are impacted by Congress not making decisions, by Congress not passing legislation that truly addresses the needs of our communities. So I'll pause now to see if there's any questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and I see none currently. And so I will just move us along in the interest of time so that we can get you all out of here in time to continue to be awesome advocates. Tori?
Hey, everybody. It's good to see you all. My name is Tori, and I work with Panel in the Office of Public Policy and Advocacy for AFSC here in Washington, D.C. And she was just talking about, these bold visions that we have for legalization and how we shouldn't get bogged down in what Congress is up to. So I'm going to follow it up with what Congress is up to so that we have some context for what we're working with right now and what the context is around legalization right now. So to start out, as you know, we have a new Biden-Harris administration, which is a big step forward from what we were working with previously, which was the Trump administration. The Trump administration's actively anti-immigrant agenda was a huge step back in a lot of immigration policies, asylum and detention and other pieces. And there was a lot of hope when this new Biden and Harris administration came forward that these immigration policies were going to be reversed and that we were going to be able to make some real progress on things that we care about in immigration policy spaces, including legalization. So we have a Democratic, slightly more progressive presidential administration that's willing to work with immigrant rights advocates and our communities on these issues. And Congress is also under the control of Democrats. in the House, we have a slim Democratic majority, which is important because while they can get things passed along party lines, that slim majority means that more moderate members of the Democrats do have a strong voice in a lot of these negotiations. The other really important part of the political makeup right now is the Senate, where there is a 50-50 split between Democrats and Republicans. As many of you know, Democrats are typically more amenable to immigrant rights bills than Republicans, and this 50-50 split makes it really difficult to get anything passed. The Democrats do have a slight advantage because the vice president, which is Kamala Harris, is able to act as a tiebreaker, but the Senate has special rules that essentially mean any bill that goes through needs 60 votes instead of just the normal majority of 50 in order to pass. So what this means is that normal legislation through regular process in Congress that would go get signed by the president is really difficult to pass right now, even though we have Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate and in the White House. However, there are some procedural tricks that they can use in the Senate to make it a little bit easier to pass, and I'll talk about that in a second. But that's sort of where we stand. A better outlook than the previous 4 years for immigration-related legislation generally, but still not a windfall of support for our issues, and definitely a lot of work to be done. Now, could you take me to the next slide? Great. So within that Congress, there's a whole bunch of different pieces of legislation that are moving, that have been introduced. I'm going to walk through just a couple of them so you see what some of the options are. The big one that's been in the news a lot lately is President Biden's immigration bill. This is the one that he had started talking about on the day of inauguration, called the U.S. Citizenship Act. And this bill provides a roadmap to citizenship for 11 million immigrants within the U.S., along with making policy changes at the border and trying to address root causes of migration. This is a huge bill and is unlikely to be able to get past the Senate. As I mentioned, you need a filibuster-proof majority, which would be 60 votes instead of 50 in order to get standalone legislation like this passed. And because this is so huge, it faces a lot of hurdles. But there's some exciting pieces in this bill, some pieces that we don't like, but that's Biden's sort of vision right now. In addition to that U.S. Citizenship Act, there are smaller pieces of legislation that we're looking at that would sort of take smaller pieces of the population that's interested in legalization and provide a pathway for legalization for them individually. So one example of this would be the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act, which focuses specifically on essential workers, and then the Farm Worker Modernization Act, which would provide a roadmap for farm workers. These are not nearly as large of an undertaking as the U.S. Citizenship Act, but don't reach our goal of legalization for everyone. And then finally, the other piece that's moving that I want to call attention to is what's called the reconciliation packages. You remember I had mentioned that it's really hard to pass things in the Senate right now because of the 60 vote threshold that we have to reach. And these reconciliation packages are a special trick that the Senate can use on budget-related legislation specifically to make it so that they only need a simple majority rather than that larger 60 vote threshold. And right now there are at least 2 reconciliation packages that we're expecting to go forward. One is the big COVID relief package that I'm sure many of you have seen in the news, but the other is a Build Back Better plan that the Biden administration has put forward. And there's hope among immigrant rights advocates that those reconciliation packages could be something that we would put additional provisions around legalization onto. So those are just some of the things moving. We've got like the big legalization bill that Biden had introduced. We've got smaller pieces that have the potential of moving individually. And we've got some of these special tricks that we could use to possibly get some of these provisions past the Senate. Panel, could you move me to the next slide? So with all of these pieces of legislation, there's things that we're watching. First of all, the exclusion of certain immigrants from legalization. The biggest thing that comes up is the criminal inadmissibility bars, where because of somebody's contact with the criminal legal system, they're then barred from seeking legalization in the US, which just compounds the existing inequities of our criminal legal system and is used to separate families and really shouldn't be included in these bills. The other piece that we've seen come up in some of these is that there is allowances for legalization for people who were deported under the Trump era, but not for people deported before then, in what seems to be, not recognizing the injustices of the immigration system, even under Obama and previous administrations. So those exclusions are especially concerning. We're also very concerned about the Democrats in Congress who are typically allies to immigrant justice communities, but who are very willing to cave to moderate Democratic and Republican pressure for changes to some of these policies. Rather than pushing for the most progressive and bold vision, they're compromising with themselves and taking some of these exclusions and putting them in where they don't need to, and where we really want them to hold firm on making sure that these bills are inclusive as possible. And finally, it's important to call out that many of these bills, there's lots of trade-offs that some politicians try to make between legalization and enforcement. This is something that we're especially concerned about because we don't want the legalization of communities to come at the cost of other communities. We don't want, increased funding for border surveillance or for ICE agents or for other abusive forms of immigration enforcement in order to win legalization. So those are some of the things that we're watching for and that we'll continue to advocate against as these legalization pieces keep moving. And that's what I've got, Panel.
Thanks, Tori. And now we'll just hear from Piper, based off what Tori has told us, knowing that Congress has an opportunity to act, and we're seeing movement, thanks to the organizing, thanks to the advocacy, thanks to honestly from political engagements, electing individuals that we think can advance the demands our communities need, to holding them accountable and reminding them of what those demands are. We see an opportunity where we can do that. And so based off of that, but knowing that very often immigration reform that we see in Congress is misguided, because immigration reform to a lot of members of Congress means more criminalization, more detention, more enforcement. What is the ask that we continue to bring back and we continue to remind our members of Congress? And once we're done with this, we'll share briefly how you can take action based on these principles, and then we'll address any questions and answers that you may have. So thank you all so much for sticking around, and we'll be wrapping up real shortly. Piper?
Yeah, I think, many of us on this webinar have been advocating for a path to citizenship for more than 2 decades now or longer. And it's important to understand that in this moment where so many policies are being introduced and so many different politicians are speaking for immigrants, that immigrants can speak for themselves. And where they've spoken across the board, not only within AFSC, but many other organizations we partner with, there's a really broad consensus that we need a clear, inclusive, transparent, and timely roadmap for all 11 million without exception. And so any ways that we can make sure that bills like the Dream and Promise Act that Tori mentioned earlier, bills that might be included in some of these budget reconciliations. Oh, I'm sorry, am I hard to hear? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So things that are included in the budget reconciliation, that they're as inclusive as they can possibly be. So whenever we show up as AFSC to be engaging a congressperson, we're going to be asking them to remove anything that would put us in the business of judging who deserves to be to have full and equal human rights within the United States. So whether that's the DREAM Act, whether that's the Promise Act, whether that's the Citizenship Act, the Essential Workers Act, wherever we show up, what we want to be saying clearly to congressionals is that we need an inclusive bills. And we also need bills that have as little ways as possible for people to fall off of that path or that roadmap. And that's part of the timely and transparent pathways that don't push people into waiting 10 years and jumping through multiple expensive hoops in order to qualify, that folks, for the most part in our communities, have been here for more than a decade and are rooted here and aren't going anywhere and should be recognized as such. We want to make sure that at the root of any bill, we're prioritizing reunification for loved ones and families. So whether that means eliminating backlogs, many people don't realize that if you're from Mexico or the Philippines and you've applied for someone from your immediate family, the backlog could take 20 or 25 years to clear before that person receives an answer. And so we want to prioritize that backlog and eliminating it. We want to make sure that folks who have been deported, who have suffered the harm of our ineffective and cruel immigration deportation system, can return, that we repair or begin to try to repair the harm of decades and of policy that excludes and punishes people by including them now. We want to make sure that we respect the human rights, labor rights, and civil rights of everyone in the country, like we've talked about before. And we know that when we push, we create space that otherwise wouldn't exist. That when we go and we call in congressional members of Congress and we explain to them the critical need for these changes in policy for us to do something transformative, that we end up with better policy, even when it's maybe not the policy that AFSC would write if we were given the chance. So I want to go ahead and pass it back to Peniel to bring us home with some of the next steps this week and to talk about some of the organizations we're partnering with to make Citizenship for All a reality. And we really hope that you'll join us in that call to Citizenship for All. Thank you.
Thank you, Piper. And so we've heard about how Congress's inactions for the past 2 decades, regardless of the administration, has sort of put our community in a very precarious position. We've seen a bloating of budgets for immigration enforcement agencies and little or no relief, except some temporary programs here and there that some administrations have had to make to protect certain communities from detention or deportation, like TPS, temporary protected status, like DACA or the Dreamer community. It's time for us to call for responsibility from members of Congress, responsibility to heal the harm done, to provide permanency, and to transform our laws. And this responsibility lies in leadership, both Democrat and Republican. Leader Chuck Schumer, Pelosi, Leader Mitch McConnell, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Judiciary Committees. If you're familiar with the makeup of Congress, all these leaders need to be called to action. And this is what, these are the spaces that we're engaging in. These are the people that we're pushing our members, our constituents, our community members to reach out to. Ways for you to take action, right? On our landing page, afsc.org/citizenship for all, you can email your own member of Congress to let them know that this is what is on your mind, this is what is in the heart of your community, and they need to prioritize that. In terms of timing, March 15th, Congress is going to be voting on some of these bills. And we want to make sure that when they're voting on them, they're including as many people as possible. You can also tweet at your member of Congress if you're someone who's on social media. We all know that Twitter is a very active space, and a lot of members of Congress engage in that, and they see their tweets. And when you tweet at them, more often than not, other constituents can see your tweets and uplift it as well. You can also educate yourself on this ask. Hear stories about individuals who are in dire need of these permanent protections, all on our website. We continue to update it with the latest information and opportunities for you to take timely action. Join us tomorrow evening to call these members of Congress, especially Democratic leadership. Please register. We will have scripts, we will have actions. We will tell you who in particular to call and what particular question you need to pose to their office, given the dynamics of one member being a leader and the other being the leader of a specific committee. A question that a participant, Terry, had asked is, does your emphasis on all 11 million mean you do not support the efforts to include 5 million dreamers and essential workers in the upcoming reconciliation bill? That is not what it means for us. For us, it means everyone. We are not an organization of and or, we're an organization of yes and. And so our red line as an organization is nobody should be excluded. And that is the red line that we put to Congress. We're not the one making the votes. Our vote is for everybody else. And we put that to Congress to say, yes, include 5 million dreamers and essential workers and the other 5 million undocumented workers and the TPS holders and the U visa individuals and anybody else who needs this protection. We don't get, because we cannot go back to our community and say, well, we decided we're going to work on dreamers and TPS today and we'll come back to you, knowing how bloated the detention and deportation system is. Even though the Trump administration has moved on, the attacks on our community still remain. Deportations are still happening. Individuals are still in detention. And so we have to push for everyone. We cannot have red lines that exclude people. Our red line is nobody should be excluded. And that's what we continue to advocate for. And so when we see this bill, we'll say, yes, we thank this leader for pushing for these 5 million individuals. You can push for more. We want to see the same unapologetic commitment to healing in the same way we saw an unapologetic, unfortunate commitment to harming in the past administration. We want to see bold action from our members of Congress, and that is what we continue to call for. Another way for you to take action is bird dogging. AFSC has perfected this art in multiple spaces. For us, bird dogging does not just mean during election campaigns, but it means at any platform that we're able to engage with elected officials, in particular their town halls. We invite you to visit townhallprojects.com to find more details of where your elected official will be hosting a virtual town hall. And we invite you and encourage you to ask them questions, to say, in our community, immigrants like my neighbors, my friends, my coworkers were targeted under the Trump administration through the ending of various programs that protected them against detention and deportation. If you're a community member with a TPS holder, maybe, or a DACA recipient. You can also say, in my church, in my parish, in my meeting house, there was a community member that was vulnerable to detention and deportation and lived in fear because of the increased surveillance of our neighborhoods. The majority of us in this community support a path to citizenship. Will you support immigration reform that provides a roadmap to citizenship, protects workers, and keeps families and communities together? You can ask that question and see what they answer and share that with us. You can message it to afsc.org on social media, and we will follow up. Feel free to also craft your own examples, centering the principles that we shared that will be on our website, as well as visiting our afsc.org/bird dogging for some tips and tricks on how to make sure you get an answer from your member in Congress on this issue. We hear often members of Congress go into the community and promise lofty dreams of protecting immigrant communities and then come back to DC and vote in another direction. We see them say that they love and will protect immigrant communities, and yet are the same members of Congress that are pressuring leadership to exclude individuals from the bills. We cannot continue to work that way, and we need to hold them accountable because we elected them in. And so we invite you to join us in these spaces, as little as calling their office. You as a constituent have the right to call them and say, what are you doing about this issue? We don't want anybody to excluded from protection. It has been decades. So we welcome you to join us. We will follow up with this PowerPoint for folks who have registered, with a recording as well, even for folks who were not able to attend or had to drop off early. And AFSC is always open to to answer your questions. If you are a community member near an AFSC office, you can also reach out to them for more ways that you can support the community to advance this call for citizenship for all. I'm looking through to see if there are any other questions. I'm seeing none. I will also invite you that if you're a Quaker or if you affiliate yourself with Quaker Principles, we have a Quaker call to action on Sunday. If you visit our website at Citizenship for All, you can also register for that space and be with like-minded community members who are Quakers as well, who are listening to this call and committing to their own advocacy for this issue. I would like to thank our speakers, especially Leroy Montel, Rosalba Hernandez, and Erica, who shared their stories, who shared their journey, and who continue to fight for themselves and their community members. I would also like to thank my other speakers, Itzel, Tori, and Piper, for sharing with us, for continuing to educate us on these things, and for keeping the community at the center of their advocacy. I'd like to thank our interpreter, Priscilla, for working with us through all the technology snafus that Zoom put us through, as well as our tech support, Kalik. And lastly, I'd like to thank you all who sat with us through this hour and a half for joining us. We welcome you to this space. We welcome you to this advocacy, because when our rights are centered, and when community members' rights are centered and are advocated for, your rights are advocated for as well. Thank you all so much. And please make sure to join us in our virtual phone bank tomorrow, as well as our Quaker call to action on Sunday.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, all.